Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Lieutenant General Robert Shea, United States Marine Corps retired, President and Chief Executive Officer of AFCEA International.
Well, a special thanks to the Color Guard from Poway, and special thanks to Larry for that great rendition. There's some few broken glasses out there, so we'll take care of them a little bit later on. But anyway, I want to welcome everyone to the premier naval conference and expo on the west coast of the United States, now in its 29th year. AFCEA and the Naval Institute have been doing this for a couple decades now, and it's been a great partnership, and we look forward to continuing that partnership as we go forward. This is a program that's going to have a lot of the key leaders from the naval services addressing such topics as accelerating capability to the fleet, artificial intelligence and in support of intelligence capabilities, risk and readiness building, a more lethal force that has been called out. I think we all recognize that in the National Defense Strategy. Talk about workforce issues, joint interoperability. There'll be a presentation here from the Army and what they're doing in terms of cross-functional teams as they develop their multi-domain operational concept. There'll be a joint representation here from DISA, and there'll be a lot of focus on acquisition for a more lethal and resilient and rapidly adapting force, as well as leveraging information for the multi-domain fight. A panel on that. There will also be a women's appreciation reception Thursday, at which Lieutenant General Reynolds and Admiral Nancy Norton will be speaking. And then Friday we'll have the CNO and the Commandant, as well as the Commandant of the Coast Guard, giving the talk that they often give or typically give on the last day of the event. And it's one of those sessions you just don't want to miss because you're hearing it from the top. You know, we're in probably the most challenging time of my lifetime. As you look around the world, we don't lack for challenges. We've got to deal with the peer and near-peer competitors as well as the threat from terrorism. So I think it's a critical juncture in our history that we're able to come together to make sure that the naval forces of this country are prepared to accept the challenges that we face going forward. There's not a place on this globe that you can't look, that you might look, that you won't see a challenge of some sort. So I think it demands from a national security perspective that we help promote and ensure that our naval forces are prepared to meet those challenges. And that's kind of the purpose of this event, is to make sure that the public, that you are aware and that you support those objectives of our naval forces as we move forward into these most challenging times. We're going to open up today, speak with Admiral Richardson, the Chief of Naval Operations, and he's certainly no stranger to anyone here. So if you just pause with me as we wait to bring Admiral Richardson up. He'll be up here in about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'll do a quick introduction and we'll get on with the program. So thank you very much, and just please hold in place. And I might add that while we're waiting out here, there are 2 booths, one for AFCEA and one for the Naval Institute. If you're not members, we would encourage you to sign up, and you can help and foster, shape the direction that these organizations and the thought leadership and the development of the ideas and concepts and the support to our naval forces across the board, whether it be Coast Guard, Marine Corps, or Navy. So please take advantage of that out there. You can visit those booths. They're right in the middle of the exhibit floor.
It's my side.
Okay, well, thank you. I don't need to spend a lot of time introducing our guest speaker this morning. He's an 82 graduate of the Naval Academy. He's had multiple command tours in the Navy and has worked on the Joint Staff. He's a man who has been responsible for shaping the Navy over the last 4 years, or 3.5 years as we move forward. He's certainly no stranger to this audience, as I said before. He has given us the 6 dimensions of naval power, the nucleus of that going forward: a bigger Navy, better Navy, network Navy, more talented Navy, more agile Navy, and a more ready Navy. Admiral Richardson, thank you for joining us here today. We wish we were here, but we look forward to seeing you later on at the end of the week. So thank you very much, sir. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Bob, for that kind introduction. Can you hear me okay? If you can hear me, say aye in a real loud voice.
Aye.
All right, that sounds pretty good. Hey, look, I'm just here in Washington, D.C., coming to you live from the Navy Yard, and we're just trying to soak up as much of the D.C. weather as we can before we are, just have to go out to San Diego and see what you got going out there. But I'm here on the Navy Yard. This is one of the oldest properties in the United States Navy, really kind of going back to our roots. Behind me is the Latrobe Gate, which is designed by the architect Benjamin Latrobe, who also designed the Decatur House, where Stephen Decatur lived, of course, a great naval hero. And since I'm kicking off the conference, and as Bob said, I'll be back at the end to kind of give you guys the quiz as to see whether you really learned what I'm about to tell you. Okay, so study hard. And there's probably no better time than the beginning of the conference to make a motion that we change the name of the theme of the conference. And so, as I understand it, the theme of the conference is, are we ready to compete, deter, and win globally? And while that is an appropriate question, I would say it's also a bit of an academic question, and it's a bit of a detached question. And as I think about the team there at AFCEA West and the folks in the room, it is this team that is not going to take a detached academic third-person viewpoint in terms of getting ready to compete, deter, and win, but this team is going to participate in actually improving our ability to do those things. And so I would make a motion, and we can come back at the end of my talk to see if anybody seconds the motion, and we'll put it to a vote, that we change the theme of the conference to something a little bit more active and a little bit more participative in terms of moving forward. So a theme such as, how can we improve our ability to deter, compete, and win is going to be my recommended theme going forward, okay? So we've been doing a lot of thinking about that in the Navy. In fact, the last calendar quarter, we've sort of been putting together a lot of strategic guidance, which has culminated in the issuing of a Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority version 2. And it talks about how we intend to get after this challenge to deter, compete, and win in great power competition. And so I'll spend some time talking about that. How about if we go to the next slide? Okay, and so what a great quote for any naval person to just spend some time appreciating. So first of all, consistent with our founding here in the Navy Yard, we have one of our founding fathers, our first president, George Washington. And he says it follows as certain as night succeeds the day, that without a decisive naval force, we can do nothing definitive, and with it, everything honorable and glorious. And so my next couple minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about what it might take to be a decisive naval force. And that is essentially a big part of what the Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority describes. And so let's go forward. So you should see now, this focus on decisiveness, okay? And so as we think about the elements of this, we've been operating under version 1 of a Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority for some time. It was issued in January of 2016, and we listed at the time that it was version 1, implying that at some point, just because of the dynamic nature of the security environment, we would have to update it. And sure enough, we did that update in the end of 2018 and issued it the first part of 19. I've got to also say that while it's my privilege to sign out the design, it is by and large a very collaborative effort of Navy leadership. We all pitched in and had a contribution in this. So the idea is that this will define our trajectory as a Navy for the next year or two until we may have to issue another version in response to the environment. So what caused us to change? Well, first of all, we did get, as Bob alluded, a new strategic guidance to ourselves. So there's a new national security strategy, there's a new national defense strategy, and both of those documents talk about the return to great power competition. And so this, in and of itself, this new strategic guidance would give us a reason to go back and revisit what we have been describing to make sure that it remains consistent. The other thing is that we've been busy on version 1 of the design for 2 years now. And we've accomplished many of the objectives, many of the goals that we set for ourselves. And so it was time to just refresh from that standpoint, to find some new goals, some reach goals that'll keep us, motivated forward and kind of reaching for the stars all the time. And then third, particularly when things are changing so much, I think it's always valid to go back and check your foundational assumptions. Do those still hold? It's always good to go back and check that to make sure that, hey, what we've founded the document on are still valid. I just recently spoke at the Atlantic Council. And at that event, I made the point that I think for the next quarter century, if not half a century, the environment is going to bring tremendous responsibility to the maritime forces, to naval and maritime forces. It's going to be a maritime century. And you see this manifested in many different ways. There's a lot of talk about the blue economy, right? And so much of our good fortune is going to be dependent upon control of the seas. A blue century has also been a term that's used more and more frequently. And I'll tell you, out there in the blue, things are changing very quickly, right? People have been going to sea for about 10,000 years, right? Starting there in the South Pacific. But in the last 25 years, maritime traffic has picked up by a factor of 4, which is an incredible increase in a quarter century, given 10,000 years of history. It's, that quadrupling of maritime traffic has roughly fueled the increase in the global GDP, which has roughly doubled. But it's not just the traditional maritime traffic. It's a dynamic environment all the way around. So one of the things that's brand new since the last time we were in great power competition is this idea of the information age, right? The internet wasn't even a thing in the Cold War, and now we can't live without it. We can't operate without it. We can't fight without it. And much of that internet, 99% of that information internationally travels on cables that run along the bottom of the sea. The Arctic ice cap is as small as it's ever been in our lifetimes, and that gives rise to continental shelves being accessible and their attendant resources. We've got trade routes and sea lanes that are open now for more parts of the year than they ever have been before. Similarly, technology has given us the ability to go deeper and deeper in the ocean and access natural resources, oil, natural gas. More and more of our food is coming from the ocean, right? So this aquaculture idea is something that's also expanding very, very quickly. There are about 30 megacities in the world right now. There's going to be more in the future, and most of those megacities are within very, very near the coast. Okay, so all of this goes to support the hypothesis, the thesis, that this is going to be a very, very important time to have firm control of our maritime domain. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about how we see the security environment in the design. And one thing you'll notice is the idea is that it's a spectrum of competition or a spectrum of rivalry. And if you look at the far left of that spectrum, you see things that are very familiar to this audience, things like peaceful presence, things like a show of force or something along those lines. Very traditional military types of activity at the low end of a competitive spectrum. And then as you move to the right of that spectrum, you can see that, well, okay, now it gets sportier as you move right. You start to see a phase of escalation. And with that escalation comes more kinetic types of activities. Things pick up. And then on the far right, you start to see the use of violence, the use of force, maybe by non-state actors, and then state actors. And then on the far right, you get sort of a total war type of an environment. A couple things about this picture. One, it is a continuous spectrum, right? There is no phasing associated with it. We deliberately left those out. And so as we think about our way going forward, the traditional thinking of, hey, are we in phase 0, phase 1, phase 2? Boy, that's becoming less and less relevant as our competitors are moving up and down that spectrum with tremendous agility. You can also see that there's that purple contribution to the spectrum, the advent of information warfare, which changes everything, potentially changing the character of warfare itself, and definitely speeding everything up, whether it's in space, whether it's in cyber, whether it's in electromagnetic warfare, whether it's in targeting and counter-targeting. And so information warfare, a new dimension since the last time we were in great power competition. Then there's two gray arrows that are on parts of the spectrum, and it really kind of starts to highlight our challenge. So as we see things emerging at the low end of the spectrum, and this part of the spectrum has been referred to by a number of different names, gray zone. There's this phrase in the strategy that's the competition below the level of conflict. It really, we're struggling to even describe activity at this part of the spectrum. And so you can see that we outline a conceptual challenge for ourselves there. We've just got to think more creatively in terms of competing effectively in that part of the spectrum. And then on the right-hand side, we want to make sure that we can always have the capability to be superior, to be dominant at the high end, so that we can always de-escalate on terms that are favorable to the United States and our allies and partners. And so this is just sort of a very rough depiction of the security environment as we see it. Okay, let's build on that slide. If you see, you should see a blue block down there that describes our response to that environment. And our response really takes on three major muscle movements, if you will. One is that we've got to restore agility to the way that we operate and we think about warfighting. And this agility really has, three components itself. First of all, as I said, there's conceptual agility. Okay, so there are new tools, new technologies, new capabilities. These give rise to new concepts. There is that conceptual challenge in the gray zone or in that low end of the competitive spectrum. So we've got to be thinking with a lot more agility to meet the much more diverse challenges of this spectrum of rivalry. The second aspect of agility is geographic ability. And so I will tell you what, for the past 15 years, we have become very, very good at getting naval force elements, strike groups, underway from Norfolk, underway from San Diego, and moving them as quickly as we can to the Gulf, doing strike operations ashore for as long as we could, and then moving them back. Okay, and if you could plot the tracks of our force elements, our strike groups back and forth, they would just be a repetitive process to get to the Gulf and back as quickly as possible. And we optimized our system to do that for the lowest possible cost, maximum presence in the Gulf for the lowest possible cost. And the system really leaned out to do anything else but that, okay? This is not going to get us where we need to go in this new environment. And so we started to do things like this dynamic force employment, all right? And as an example, we sent the Harry S. Truman Strike Group north
up into the Arctic, above the Arctic Circle. It was the first time we've done that since 1991. And I'll tell you what, while many things have changed since 91, it is still amazingly cold in November north of the Arctic Circle. And so, that raises tremendous challenges, right? So doing flight operations in that type of weather. The seas, for those of you who have been in the North Atlantic in the winter, continue to pitch like crazy. And so that presents an operational and even a safety hazard. And so the communications up there and satellite footprints, all of that were muscles that we had to regrow as we sent the strike group up there. In fact, it even took, very, very senior intervention to get things like food and mail up to the strike group in those high latitudes, because we just have not done that in so long. So there's this idea of geographic agility. And then finally, there's this dimension of technical agility, technological agility. We simply must be able to get capabilities, technology, tools, weapon systems into the hands of our sailors faster. This, I think, is a strategic Achilles heel for us, and be happy to talk about that more when I come out and see you on Friday. So we've got to get agility with those three components back. The other thing is that this is going to be a long competition, right? Decades. And so we've got to think about sustainable approaches to competing. We cannot run our forces, our joint force, at the red line and expect it to last. So we must think in terms of sustainable approaches, infinite game types of thinking, so that we can get ahead and stay ahead for the long run. And so this idea of sustainability is very important. And then finally, as I said, we have got to control the high end of that conflict. Okay, we always have to maintain the ability to seize the high end and de-escalate the conflict on our terms, to move it as far left as possible. It's very consistent with this idea of sustainability that we are able to de-escalate to a lower level of kinetic operations, and that will also be consistent with this long-term approach, this sustainable approach. Okay, so in rough terms, that's our description of the security environment against our great power competitors, China and Russia, and how we're in a very high level going to get after it. We'll go to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about the structure of the design itself. And so you can see at the top of that slide that sort of our end state, okay? And it basically describes that we have got to be designing and building a Navy that is composed of high-performing teams that can learn faster, are equipped better, and can operate more effectively than any of our adversaries. That's at the top of that slide. And then there are 4 lines of effort, right? And we've just as before, we coded them by color. The blue line of effort talks about operation and warfighting. Notably, we put diversity in the blue line of effort because as we go forward in this information age with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, bringing diversity and creativity to the human contribution to that is going to be decisive going forward. Okay, so that's our blue line of effort. You move just a little bit to the right, you see a green line of effort, which continues to talk about achieving results at high velocity. So in version 1, we talked about high velocity learning. Version 2, we focused more in on high velocity outcomes. And if you have a chance to read the document, we list a number of very specific outcomes in terms of delivering capability to the fleet. It also, in the green line of effort, talks about this idea of the Navy as a learning engine itself, right? And so the combination of our schools, our war games, our fleet exercises, our experiments, our analysis, all of that pitches together to help us learn as an entire Navy. And I look forward to also discussing more about that when I get out there. You move forward now to the right again to our gold line of effort. This talks about our most treasured weapon as our people. okay? And it describes how we are updating our entire approach to recruiting, to training, to assigning, to paying, to retaining our people. And so a very exciting line of effort where we are essentially going to be delivering almost everything a sailor needs right to their smart device, and put so much more transparency and control of their destiny in their hands. And so this is a really exciting part of our business, and worth a lot of study during this the conference. Finally, on the right-hand side is our purple line of effort. This talks about the importance of our partnerships. Partnerships with certainly our sister services, particularly the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard, partnerships with the rest of the government, the interagency, partnerships with industry, so many of you in the audience, partnerships with academia, and then partnerships with our allies around the world, our allies and partners. You know, the United States Navy really is only one node in several networks, and we operate best and most effectively if we realize that and acknowledge this networked approach, okay? And so lots of emphasis on our partners. You know, nations that have a lot of allies and partners sustain, and nations that try and take it on their own don't. And so it's important that we foster, we strengthen and expand our network of partners. Now, it's also important at the bottom of the slide to realize that everything rests on a foundation of core attributes. Boy, I'll tell you, a big part of success across all four of those lines of effort is dependent upon our value proposition. We are a force of honor, courage, and commitment. And as we think of our behaviors must exhibit those four core attributes: initiative, accountability, toughness, and integrity, okay? And so that kind of segues me to the last part of my talk here, and then I'll let the conference go on. In fact, I got to rush out of here and get on the plane to go out to California so I can meet myself somewhere and finish the conference up as the last event. Okay, I'll tell you what. So we've got, now you should be looking at a slide with George Washington, and we are back to that quote, which is so great. And we spent a lot of time talking about a decisive naval force. What makes a naval force decisive? But I want to shift our emphasis now to this part of the quote that talks about honor and glory. And I'm spending more and more of my time talking and fleshing out this concept of honor and glory. Hey, this goes right back to our founding fathers. What does the United States of America mean to the world? What is our value statement to the world? What do we stand for? And you go back to those founding documents. You know, we stand for the hope of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you think about the privilege of being in the naval service, the privilege of being our forward force, we are often the first point of contact for so many around the world with the United States of America. Every one of our ships is sovereign U.S. territory. Every one of our sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen is a diplomat contributing to not only the military element of power, but also the diplomatic element of power. A quick scan of our history would show that so many of our most important treaties, conferences, summits have been held on Navy warships. If you think about a warship making a port call in a foreign country, it's almost a given that the U.S. ambassador to that country will host a reception on a chunk of the United States of America, the decks of that ship. So we have a tremendous contribution to the diplomatic element of power. Similarly, we're out there just as we did in our early days, protecting our trade, right? We're keeping sea lanes open. We're keeping navigation free. And so our contribution, our intersection with the economic element of national power, also very, very important part of being a Navy sailor. And so not only do you have the military dimension of power, but also the diplomatic, also the economic, and then of course, there is no mariner on the seas that will go past any other mariner or person in distress. And so we have this idea that we will always lend assistance to a mariner in distress, always lend assistance to someone who needs help in a humanitarian crisis of any nature, man-made or natural. And so it's really a terrific time to center up and think about the value statement that we bring not only to the country, but really to the world by virtue of being a part of the Navy team. So we're going to go back now to my motion that we shift the nature of the theme of this conference away from an academic and detached perspective. Hey, are we ready for great power competition? And much more to an active role where we use our time together at AFCEA West to team together and think about ways that we can actually improve our ways to be more competitive in great power competition, to be better at deterring, competing, and winning. And so I make a motion that we shift the tone of the conference. Will anybody second that motion? I have absolutely no way to see that anybody's seconding the motion, so I'm going to assume that of course you did, and then I can hear you. And so all in favor say aye. Okay, and all opposed say nay. I did hear one nay. I'm going to have a talk with you when I come out on Friday, and but I think the ayes have it. I look forward to a really kinetic and participative conversation, and I look forward to closing it out on Friday. Thank you all very much.
Thank you,
We're
Admiral
out
Richardson.
from the Navy.
I was going to suggest we forego the vote because the message came across loud and clear. So thank you very much, and Godspeed and safe travels, and we look forward to seeing you out here in San Diego. Thank you very much.